We are live. We are live. We are live. Eric, it's another week in the books. Eric, it's another week that people are either living their dreams or getting crushed by them. How you feeling as we start? We are now entering officially. It is now what I like to call the official fantasy basketball season. That early season stuff is starting to go by the wayside where you're getting hit with some real injuries, especially if you got anything in the Philadelphia backcourt. Eric, how are your teams doing? How are you feeling? Is there anyone who you just want to bang on right away as we start the show to say, hey, this is my waiver wire gem. I've been calling it, or I've stayed away and I was wrong. Anything like that you want to start us with today?
Well, first of all, it's high, and it's not such a good week because I have so many shares of Tyrese Maxey. He was my guy coming into this draft. I had really high hopes, and for the most part, on and off, he was living up to them up until this fractured foot, and then he's going to be kept out for 3 to 4 weeks. As a result, since this is a waiver wire show, I might as well talk about my reactions to that.
Yeah,
I
please.
I did my best to grab as many Shake Milton shares as possible. I think I was able to secure three. But aside from Milton, there's DeAnthony Melton, who might be available in shallower leagues, but he wasn't available in any of mine because I tend to play in deeper leagues. Shake Milton was the guy I was targeting. To some extent, in deeper formats, I would recommend Niang as a 3-point shooting specialist, but nowhere near to the usage and role bump that Milton is gonna get. So that's my Tyrese Maxey rant and reaction. I'm also happy to say, and this is just to keep the ball rolling, that the two guys I've had my eye in on the Wizards, specifically um, Denny Avdia and Corey Kispert, some of my deep league specials are doing okay enough to be streamed lately. Kispert fell off for like a game when Bradley Beal returned, but he produced well off the bench the other game, and just tonight he played reasonably well as a spot starter. I believe starting in place of Monte Morris. So I recommend Kispert as your, uh, like I said last week, Kyle Korver archetype. You know, guy, efficient shooting, 3 points, the occasional steal, and he's somebody I highly recommend picking up.
I like it. I know that was your guy from earlier this week, I should say as well, Corey Kispert. Question for you, because I know you were definitely not alone when Tyrese Maxey got injured, and everybody said, "Oh shoot, I'm gonna have a problem here." I think a lot of people were banking on that production with James Harden sitting on the sidelines as sort of an elevation for their team. But by the same token, I think you bring up a good point, Anthony Melton, because maybe his shelf life, so to speak, gets extended a little bit there, especially if Harden winds up returning before Maxey. Although we haven't really had any real updates on Harden other than, it is what it is until it isn't. So, I know people were kind of soft targeting early December there, but I don't know. That it always worries me when a guy who, needs his feet for a living has a foot injury. That's concerning for me. Harden pounds on those feet a lot, right?
True.
So we'll see. But let me ask you this, because all of a sudden, Philadelphia can't really withstand another injury. Really, two of their three best players, unless you want to put Tobias Harris in that conversation, and even he missed the last game, are out of the lineup right now. And if Tobias sits out, it's Joel Embiid and a bunch of guys basically. So is this? I know we're here for the waiver wire, but while we're on this topic, let's just bake it in. Is this a moment where if you're a Joel Embiid guy, are you looking to potentially sell high on Embiid, or are you just riding this wave?
No, I'm going to ride him. I have one Joel Embiid share, and it's in an 8-cat roto. I think that he's going to see a nice carryover of his MVP in quotes campaign. Obviously, he's lost that award for the last couple of seasons, coming in as the bridesmaid behind Nikola Jokic. But with Jokic coming in to the season a bit slow
Mhm.
in terms of his fantasy value. I think the Embiid crazy production as of late, like over his last 3 games, the guy's been an absolute monster. Scoring over 30 points per game with a complete, you know, just complete stat line chock full of rebounds, threes, assists, steals, blocks, percentages, the works. Um, yeah, I think he's gonna be solid. I don't think there's much point in trading away an Embiid. Only in to qualify that, probably the only situation where I would let go of Embiid as an Embiid owner is if I was desperate for depth, and I'd
Mm.
break him down into smaller, equally productive pieces who together would, probably exceed his value ideally. Him being the best player in that transaction. But otherwise, I would prefer to stand pat.
Yeah, if I had Embiid on my team that has Nikola Jokic and Kawhi Leonard and Kate Cunningham, that you might be speaking to a GM like me who's looking for all of a sudden needs some players who, I'm relying a lot more. I might be relying on Austin Reeves and Troy Brown Jr. more than the Lakers are, and that's really saying something here. Okay. So I know that brings it full circle. I wanted to bring up something as we start the show, Eric. Every time we get on the show, I like to do a little bit of a recap, which is okay, let's take a wide net here and look at some of the more added guys from the last week or so, right? So you got guys like, Tyus Jones, obviously with John Morant week to week with the ankle sprain. That's an easy one. You got guys like, maybe a little less obvious, but still equally tantalizing, and Caleb Martin. Killian Hayes has been a really popular ad now that Cunningham is for sure going to miss at least extended time, if not the rest of the season. Shake Milton, who you touched on, Torrey Craig as well. Austin Reeves, though. Austin Reeves, your guy, Austin Reeves. You talked about him, I want to say, a couple weeks ago. And I said to you, look, Austin Reeves is going to have to become the player that so many people think he is, already is, to really bring fantasy value. And I said, look, he's got to start playing 30 minutes a night. He's going to have to hit a few more threes. He's going to have to do all these things. And you know what? As I can see that finger going, that's exactly what's been happening, Eric, right? So just in the last handful of games, Austin Reeves playing 30, 35, 33, 33, 36 minutes. All of those games, I'd still like to see him hit a few more threes, but he's averaging about 3 a game. He's in double-digit scoring in four of those 5 games. I'd love to see him bring a little bit more on the periphery, but if he can add 2 to 3 threes a game and he can score between 15 and 20 a game, and he's not going to make too many mistakes, he also shoots it well from the field generally, that's a player who does not belong on waiver wires. And right now, he's still only 10% owned in Yahoo leagues.
Travesty. I guess the LeBron factor is something to consider there. He's probably going to see a drop. I'm talking about Reeves when LeBron returns, but I think if Darvin Ham is smart, and he's looked pretty smart so far, considering the challenges he has with this Laker roster. I think that he will be able to untap Reeves fully at some point in the season. But as you can tell, as a Laker fan, it's been a tough juggling act for a new head coach, and all of those challenges. Having a guy as great and as talented as LeBron, having another guy who can be as dominant on both ends of the court as Anthony Davis, and someone like Russell Westbrook who can on occasion produce well. It's just, I mean, on paper it's supposed to work, but real life basketball is not played on paper. We play on paper, so to speak, in fantasy basketball, but it's far more complex when you're dealing with real life, um, issues and personalities and people. So, but I think Austin Reeves is the guy. When you look down on that roster, I mean, he's not gonna get upstaged by any Wenyan Gabriel or Troy Brown Juniors here, right? And to some extent, he's a very good two-way guard that not all of his contributions on the court make it onto the stat sheet just yet. As you were pointing out, threes would be probably the best gateway towards an improved fantasy value, but I've already stashed 2 shares of Austin Reeves so far since I last spoke about him. Because, like I said, I've had my eye on him, and he's someone I fully recommend our viewers, to take a closer look into. And as you pointed out, the minutes have been there for the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest with you, I said it the other day when he was in the midst of playing well once again. Regardless of who's available for these Lakers, Austin Reeves should be a starter. I mean, they need him out there. He seems to be getting more confident with more minutes, which is not a surprise. I mean, the more that we do something, the more our confidence generally grows in that area. He definitely looks like he belongs. There's no question about that. The Lakers rotation isn't exactly packed with talent, and so especially even when everyone is healthy, they're not really talented on the wing. They've got, one, maybe 2 guys there. So Austin Reeves has an opportunity that he might not have on another team. And, he can't be the Lakers' next Alex Caruso. And what I mean by that is that he can't be that role player who looks so good, you develop him, and then you watch him walk for, basically the difference of a minimum contract every year in terms of how you value the player. So I don't think you can speak to a Lakers fan in the world who doesn't say that they don't miss Alex Caruso on this team and how helpful Alex Caruso would be on this team. But instead, he's wearing that Chicago red, and we got Austin Reeves to talk about in the purple and gold. 2 very different players, but nonetheless, definitely can't be the next Caruso. Erik, there's a couple of guys who I want to get your opinion on as we go forward here. Austin Reeves was one of them, but I want to throw a couple other names at you. Alec Burks is a name that's been a little bit more popular on the waiver wire, and then with Cade Cunningham now out of the lineup indefinitely. And then Santi Aldama. It's a guy who's, a little under 50% owned, so probably in competitive leagues, he's more rostered than not, but a little under 50% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Do either of those guys strike you as someone you should have on your team or somebody you should be watching from the waiver wire? Where are you at on those 2 guys? We'll start with Burks, and then we'll go to Santi Aldama afterward. Oh, we lost your sound.
There. Sorry. Thank you.
No
I was muted for a while. I forgot. Let's start with Burks. He's definitely somebody I have an eye on and who I've, recommended as a choose based on your need guy side by side with Killian Hayes. Because he's going to be the more efficient scorer compared to Hayes, but Hayes is going to be that pass first point guard that the Pistons will need. But off the bench, when you look at the bench of the Pistons, there's no one else outside of Burks who's going to be that, microwave offense generator for them. So he's somebody I'd consider adding, and especially if I'm playing an efficiency build in head-to-head, I'd really love him. Now, Santi Aldama is somebody very interesting. I've seen him actually dropped in one league. And that's because of the return of Jaren Jackson Jr. Aldama was filling in as the starting power forward while JJJ was out. But with JJJ back, we've seen a decrease in minutes and production from Aldama. He apparently needed all the usage that he was getting in order to produce that, beautiful 1-1-1, balanced stat set that he was able to deliver on reasonably efficient production and scoring. Obviously, JJJ, as long as he stays healthy, is going to get all the minutes that he can handle, as long as he also stays out of foul trouble, that is. That being the case, we might see Aldama's minutes continue to trickle downward. But until such time that he starts giving me maybe 3 or 4 straight bad games, I'm going to hold on to him in 1, 2, 3 leagues that I have Aldama. I'm going to hold on to him for now. So I'm going to see how he fits alongside, in the rotation with JJJ healthy. So that's pretty much where I'm at with him.
I mean, a couple things with him, one is I always like to sort of not create a caveat, but, it's important to mention, unless even if sometimes they're the premium rookies, but especially when you're talking about those rookies who are, middle lottery, middle first round, end of the first round, guys who aren't as highly hyped or as highly recruited or as highly coveted, or however you want to phrase that. The rookie wall can also be real in the NBA. You can go on a nice 15, 20 game stretch, and then you might really struggle for 5 or 10 games, because as more players get to know who you are, They pay a different level of attention to you. And also in the NBA, you're playing a level of competition every other night, more or less. That's unlike any other in the world. I mean, look, let's look at Dwight Howard, okay? It's a travesty to me that Dwight Howard has to finish his career in Taiwan. Not because I don't want the people of Taiwan to experience Dwight Howard, okay? But if DeAndre Jordan is still collecting NBA checks, Eric, Dwight Howard should be collecting NBA checks too. Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan are in the NBA. Dwight Howard is not. That doesn't seem quite right to me, okay? But he goes, he debuts, he has, I don't even call it a video game, beyond the video game numbers. I mean, basically,
NBA Jam numbers,
25, NBA Jam numbers, 38 points, 25 rebounds, 9 assists, 4 or 5 blocks. I mean, dude is everywhere. I saw the highlights. He's hitting threes. He's doing the Superman dunks. And, to be fair, he's dunking over a guy who's looks like he's about my height, 5'8", 5'7", somewhere in there at one point. But they got some taller guys as well. And, it's just clear that he is so much better than anyone else he's sharing the court with, right? And it really helps to highlight the level of play in the NBA. So now that you have here in the Memphis situation, 2 things. One, every JJJ truther is like going through the roof right now. The JJJ fans and Bol fans are sharing this special place on top of the mountain right now where it's like, this is what we've been waiting for. Can't wait. Finally, our time is here, right? I don't know if you've ever seen Ted, but there's a scene in the second Ted where he runs up to the jury stand. He's like, all right, my turn, and that's how I feel like all these guys feel. All right, it's my turn finally. So you have that. But also to your point, JJJ is going to get as many minutes as he can handle as long as he can stay on the court. JJJ hasn't exactly been a harbinger of health throughout his NBA career. I mean, this is a guy who spent a lot of time on the sideline so far, and usually big men who suffer injuries to their lower half, those don't just suddenly dissipate or go away over time. It's sort of that chronic concern that we have with them, right? Like as dominant as Anthony Davis has been over the last 2 games in particular, part of me is also conditioned to wait, just like, okay, but when's it going to fall out? What's going to happen next, right? You become conditioned to expect that. So I think when you're relying on younger guys, especially rookies or guys who haven't necessarily done it at the level of consistency that they've started with to begin the NBA season, you don't have to hedge your bet, but you have to take that into consideration. It's not just a straight projection forward. It's not like we're looking at, Steph Curry, who's doing this for the umpteenth time in his career. We're just looking at Devin Booker doing it again, right? This is now something you have to consider that's beyond just the numbers in front of you. We talked a little bit about Nick Richards and Mason Plumlee and exactly what's going on in Charlotte. Well, since we last talked, Eric, LaMelo Ball has aggravated his ankle again. What is the move in Charlotte? Because you look at Nick Richards, the last 2 games, he's got a double-double in each one, and people are starting to get a little bit more, I don't want to say revving the engines, but they're getting a little bit more interested in him. But I look at this and I say, okay, he had 2 games. One was a high-scoring affair. I believe it was actually an overtime game. Mason Plumlee was in foul trouble, could never get it going. The other game against Washington, he had a double-double. Eric, he played 17 minutes. It's hard for me to get excited about guys who play 15 to 18 minutes because that per-minute production has to be so high that I almost view it as unsustainable a lot of the time. So Nick Richards right now will give about 20% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Do you think that's about the right number for him, or should that number be higher?
All right. He's shown to be pretty inconsistent, actually. He'll have a nice double-double here and there, despite playing less than 20 minutes a game. But then he'll fall off at some point, even the same number of minutes, but won't produce as well. Going to your original question also about the LaMelo Ball situation, I'd say it's pretty straightforward. We're going to go back and, take another drink at that Dennis Smith Jr. trough. Speaking of which, DSJ was back tonight, and he's been out for the last few games. But he, came back tonight and played 25 minutes, scored 6 points, but recorded 3 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. And until LaMelo Ball comes back, it's DSJ time all over again. Call it deja vu or whatever the hell you want to you do. But there's pretty much no choice. But it's not the same exact situation as it was back in the start of the season when Ball was out, because we also missed a lot of time from Gordon Hayward with that shoulder injury. Hayward was active tonight and played something like 37 minutes and was able to score 20 points in the game. And he's actually, throughout his career, been recognized as a pretty decent passer, as a wing slash forward. So there won't be as much ball distribution responsibilities that DSJ will need to cover, but he will be there on defense, providing the defense that, well, close to, but not exactly obviously the same level that Ball was able to, but basically try his best to fulfill the role that Ball had on that side of the court. So DSJ is my recommended pickup. Most cases, Hayward is already rostered in a lot of leagues, so we're gonna see an uptick from Hayward, assuming he can stay healthy,
True.
and it's DSJ time all over again.
I feel like Gordon Hayward is like the most under the radar $30 million a year player in maybe the history of the NBA. Like it's sort of surreal. I can see it so vividly. I remember a buddy of mine and I were watching that opening night game when the Celtics were playing the Cavs, and he had this horrific injury, right? And it's just, that's all I see. It's kind of like, it's all I see when I look at him. And I know he doesn't want to think about that, but man, that was so gruesome. It's hard to believe. I mean, it makes me think about Paul George and that injury too, and what player he's, returned to being since. I mean, it's amazing. These guys are amazing in what they do. So just shout out to modern medicine. Shout out to all these guys in their road to recovery. Erik, we're at a point in the season now where, if you're in head-to-head leagues, you're probably about 4 weeks or so in, 5 weeks or so in. You're in roto leagues, you're obviously in the same spot, but I think you're far enough in at this point to get a fairly decent idea about what your team is, right? Like, then we are who our record says we are, right? Like, we've now progressed past the point of, well, if this and if that and maybe this and, sort of having those stars align. You're going to wait 7, 8, 9 weeks for that. You're going to find yourself 20, 25, 30 games back in the standings in some head-to-head leagues. You're going to find yourself back in categories of roto leagues that are insurmountable. I mean, you just can't come back from them. That's one of my favorite things about roto strategy is that if you are going to punt a category, you have to be so strong in those other categories, because if you truly punt a category in roto, you're saying I'm fine finishing at the bottom here because I know I'm going to be strong all the way atop the rest of the way, all right here. And that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So I give kudos to the people who are able to do that. That said, what is your advice to someone who is sort of, they don't have any big pieces to trade because they're relying on those players. They don't really have any ancillary pieces. They don't have like that duplicate talent, like, oh, I got more than enough assists, I can send those off. But they're just kind of, riding in the middle of the pack. What's your best advice in terms of riding the waiver wire to those types of fantasy general managers?
I would say stream to lock down your strengths, because make sure you win what you're supposed to win. Because if you mess up there, you're just gonna fall into a bigger hole. Like as you said, in that weekly matchup, because you're already punting maybe 1 or 2 categories, and I'd fear to say to wonder what if you're punting more than that. But make sure you win what you need to win. So if we're talking about a 5-4 situation and you're not doing too well, stream. I would, and depending on the league, of course, not all leagues are the same. Some are more active than others. But in the case where you belong to a league where it's fairly active, I'd try my best to take advantage of the 9-cat rankings. Try to see if you can flip a guy who is not really perfect for your build, and as you said, what your strengths and weaknesses are right now. For example, I was just approached by another manager last night, my time, offering me Terry Rozier. He has a build where he's trying to win field goal, but as we've seen from Terry so far this season, he's shooting way below 40%. So Terry is not exactly panning out. I mean, he was shooting 44.4 last season, So the guy had an expectation. Okay, Terry will hurt me, but just a little bit in the field goal category. But when Terry's shooting sub, 40%, and he I think shot 3 of 14 tonight, for example, and that those shooting
Hmm.
splits are gonna add up and are gonna eat into his weekly totals. So he came to me and was offering Terry Rozier, chatting me up about my Boyan Bogdanovic, for example, who has been quite the surprise,
Uh-huh.
seeing a renaissance in his game. Obviously, Terry is the bigger name and has the better value history. So he was asking for some kind of 2 for 2, but not going into more detail regarding what he was offering, but using that more as an example. Try to reach out, try to find guys who aren't as high in the rank. I mean, Bogdanovich is somewhere in the top 80s. Rozier finished somewhere in the top 30 last season. So making that swap from his perspective as things are playing out now is something that he should and is considering, and that's why he approached me. So I would recommend the same kind of move. It was a smart move, and I was not telling it to him straight in his face, but it's a smart move, and he's doing his best to improve his team, solve those issues that he has, solve those issues that your team has, like when guys miss the mark in terms of your projections, they're not delivering as you've expected. Try to trade.
Let me give you a pair of Jalen's for you. Jalen Duran, Jalen Williams. OKC. You interested in either one of those guys?
Oh yeah. um, but more from a deep league standpoint, maybe Williams would, yeah, I'd consider in a 12 teamer, but really not somebody I'd get too attached to.
Okay.
They're both guys. Those are both Jalen's are names that I'm going to be throwing out in this new feature that I've launched last week here on Sports Ethos. It's the Deep League Dredge. I've been focusing a lot on insights for guys playing in 16 team leagues or deeper, and um, I think four of my leagues, of my biggest buy-in leagues, are 16 deep. So I'm, got names like that. Um, Jalen Williams has come in and out of that Thunder starting lineup more times than I can or care to count. But when he's given the opportunity, he's shown that he can do a lot. He can pass the ball. He can be a two-way defender, score at all levels. Just not at an explosive level that you'd consider him. Hey, this guy's a future all-star, etc., etc. But
Mhm.
he just does enough for you to be interested. Just does enough that you'd consider him as a well-rounded glue guy. And we've thrown that term around in the fantasy industry. He'll give you a boost across the board without hurting you anywhere, and that's where the bulk of his fantasy value comes from. Now, Jalen Duren, on the other hand, has to play um, extremely well to beat out um, Marvin Bagley, who's currently playing ahead of him. And the Pistons even opted to start Isaiah Livers tonight. And as much as I am a closet, cult Livers fan, Livers didn't really impress in 16 minutes. Duran, on the other hand, came up with 12 and 8 tonight versus the Kings in 27 minutes. Duran was actually really great in college. I had my eye on him. I mean, he's a lottery guy, but he is actually one of the youngest guys in the lottery this season. I'm not even sure if he's 20 years old yet. I think
He's
he's
he's he's he's not, and so I only know this because the Pistons were playing the Lakers the other night, and on Friday when the two teams were squaring off, it was actually Durant's birthday. It was his 19th birthday, which made him the first ever NBA player who was younger than LeBron's career. Let me say that again. younger than LeBron's career. So when LeBron debuted versus Sacramento Kings wearing that Cleveland Cavs oversized jersey, Jalen Duren was not even born yet. So you want to feel old? Because I felt old after hearing that. There you go. That was my daily dose of how old are you, right? So it was
Okay.
really,
Okay, I feel really old
yeah,
now.
right.
Right.
It
Okay,
makes me.
so
It's like when you realize that 1985 was 40 years ago and not 20 years ago. It's a good time.
oh dear God.
Yeah.
Anyway, so on the other side of that same coin, that highlights how young Duran is,
Yeah.
and because of his youth, he still has a lot to learn. Um, all right, from a physical standpoint, this kid, quote in quotes, is a freaking man child. His body is as NBA ready as there is in his draft class. I
Right.
mean, he has the body, but he really doesn't have the experience and maybe the maturity to absorb all of that knowledge. I mean, he's just starting his career, and
Yeah.
so far, um, in college, he was able to rely on his strength, his hops, his overall athleticism to carry him, as that star center. But that's almost always nearly not enough when you get to the NBA level of basketball. So Duran, um, I'd say, is a bit raw,
Mhm.
but I would consider him easily as a rebound streamer,
Okay.
in almost everywhere. And I would definitely hold him in my 16 team leagues or deeper, given the current situation that the Pistons are missing Isaiah Stewart. He will obviously fade quickly once Stewart returns, because Stewart was actually starting to pick up just before he got injured, if
Right.
you notice that. So we might see Duran fade, and that's probably the time where I will revisit his rosterable status in my leagues of purview in that advice column.
I think that's a fair take. Eric, Joe Harris, don't look now. Joe Harris has 4 triples in 2 straight games. Joe Harris is back to playing minutes in the 30s. Joe Harris was once viewed as an elite 3-point specialist. Eric, Joe Harris is not even rostered in 15% of Yahoo leagues. Is now the time?
Yep. I picked him up before I went to sleep last night for today's game. Apparently, it paid off. He scored 13 points, hit 4 threes, as you said, and, chipped in across the board, apparently, with 3 assists, a steal, and a block. 28 minutes only in a win over the Grizzlies. That's good enough for me. Um, and yeah, now's the time. I mean, a lot of the focus early on for the Nets has been on guys like Royce O'Neal, who was one of the hottest pickups early on. But now the spotlight is moving towards, guys like Joe Harris, who started off injured. Um, but yeah, just another plug guy I want to add coming from the Nets for my deep leagues, and you can call it a freebie since I'll just be writing about it before Tuesday, because it drops Tuesday mornings, and that's Yuta Watanabe.
Mm.
Oh, as an Asian myself, who hasn't had somebody to cheer for outside of Jordan Clarkson and Jeremy Lin in such a long time, Yuta is actually in the midst of a breakout season.
He was
I
leading. He was leading the NBA in 3-point field goal percentage the other day.
Oh, there you go. That he is just feeling it. Um, as a guy who played basketball casually before before Jalen Duren was born. Let's put it that way. Um, I Once you feel your shot, sometimes it just you that muscle memory kicks in, and you remember how to keep that shot falling, as long as it's not disrupted, etc., etc. But I think that's the case for Yuta Watanabe right now. He's making these shots, and because he's been so successful at knocking down those 3 pointers, not only has he been worthy of streaming for those, for that stat in particular, but
Mm.
also because he's actually quite efficient shooting from the field overall. Is that I think that this is not just a hot streak. I think it's something that's clicked. He's not some rookie like we were talking about. This guy has paid his dues, and he's just, starting a new life, quote unquote, here in the Nets after spending so many years on the, with the Raptors. And I think on this team especially, there is this need for guys like Joe Harris, Yuta Watanabe, Seth Curry to all hit those threes, because it opens up things for Kevin Durant, even Ben Simmons, who finally had a great breakout game with 22 points tonight. Um, it's those guys that free up the stars, free up, even Kyrie Irving to some extent. So yeah, kudos to O'Neal, Harris, and Watanabe. Shout outs to them.
Watanabe had 16 points tonight. 6 of 9 from the field, 4 of 6 from downtown. So, yeah, we take that level of efficiency and then some, especially on a Nets team that had, to your point, Ben Simmons going off for 22, Durant with 26, missing Nico Claxton in this game. I don't think that's a huge deal. I still think Watanabe should be between probably 22 to 26 minutes pretty consistently right now for these Nets because, frankly, they need him. Kyrie Irving did return. I just wanted to mention that in this one. Kind of a weird game for him in that he had 0 assists. That's unusual. 14 points wasn't exactly the sexiest return we've ever seen, but the Nets won, and I think that's really all they care about right now. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I myself don't know the answer to this question, and I'm not sure that anyone else does. The Warriors gave Jordan Poole 140 million reasons to be second-guessing his every move, and fantasy GMs drafted him as a bare minimum as a top 100 player, and frankly, a lot higher than that. Erik, this is a player who in 9-cat leagues sits outside the top 125 on the season. You have no idea what you're going to get from him on any given night. What do you do?
All right. I actually drafted Jordan Poole in a league that I consider to be one of the most important for me, and that's the 30-team experts league. He was my third pick, and with that was and he's hurting me right now. My understanding, it's not just him, right? Just look at the Warriors.
Right.
Outside of Stephen Curry, everyone is not playing at the level that
we've seen better. We've seen better from the Warriors.
Obviously. Yeah. And I've been in my blurbs, I've been labeling it as that championship hangover. I mean, they're just not that hungry. You have so many rings on your fingers, and in the back of your head, why can't we just coast? And I think to some degree, guys like Draymond Green, who has more issues in his head beyond coasting, Jordan Poole, who probably in his mind wants to already be the next Golden State Warriors star, but still has to wait behind a still productive Steph Curry and the now floundering Klay Thompson, sadly.
Although he did have quite the game tonight. He had 10 threes tonight, so maybe it's a sign of things to come.
All right. Let's call it a slow start for now. Yeah. But I think it's not just Poole. I think it's a problem with the Warriors as a whole. And as we've seen in the past, and they've done this before, at some point, Steve Kerr did something or they did something. They can flip a switch and turn themselves on into this, death ball playoff mode, whatever cheat code you want to call it. Once they do that, we're going to see the Jordan Poole I drafted. So I think it's more of a buy low situation. All right. Okay. At some point, you're going to be resting. You're going to have to rest. I mean, you're already guaranteed to be resting Klay Thompson on so many nights due to injury management. Playing at this level, Steph is gotta, need some rest soon, being on the wrong side of 30. Same goes, basically the big three are gonna rest. And I at the time, was thinking Jordan Poole will maximize all of these absences to his benefit and drop me, 25 points and so peripherals at his very nice 46 something field goal percentage. So I'd say it's a buy low. Maybe he's not going to live up to the expectations I originally had preseason, but I think he's going to end up better than he's currently performing. So I'd say he's buy low. And if I had him, I'd hold.
Yeah,
And I do hold it.
I
I
mean,
do
if
have
you
him. And
have
I'm
him,
gonna,
you're definitely not selling because
no. I
what's
don't think this
what's
is.
the point?
I'm not panicking. For some reason,
I
which
think that's the difference between fantasy and reality, though, right? Because I think the Warriors are a little panicked that they just gave him
they
100,
should be panicking.
right? I mean, they sunk more than $250 million into him and Andrew Wiggins, and both of those guys were indispensable to winning the title last year. But if you don't think part of their new extensions were paying for last season's production and last season's title, we call that the title tax. I mean, you see it prevalently in baseball because it's a different salary structure, but that was very much a title tax because neither of those guys are really $30 to $40 million a year players. But hey, if Gordon Hayward's making $30 million a year, if I'm Jordan Poole's agent, I start right there too. So I understand it. Okay. And then right before we get to our question here that just came up, I did want to mention one other guy because we talked injuries a little bit before with Shake Milton stepping in for Tyrese Maxey and obviously James Harden out of the lineup. But we didn't talk too much about, we did touch on the Grizzlies, but we didn't talk about Desmond Bane, who's been missing some time with his toe injury. Desmond Bane's going to be out for probably looks like at least another couple of weeks here. I know when people think about toe injuries, they're like, oh, how painful could it be? Why isn't he playing? All these sorts of things. If you ever had turf toe, it is one of the most painful things you have ever experienced in your life. I'd rather slam my hand in a door than stub my toe. I don't know what it is for me. That's my pain issue. So toe injuries for basketball players is very hard because everything you do, you're pushing off. It is the basis for so much stuff. That's why when a player has, plantar fasciitis or an issue with their plantar fascia, it's like, oh, just play through it. It's not quite that simple. So with him spending some time on the sidelines, and we all know what Dillon Brooks is, or more specifically what he isn't, and now John Morant also on the sidelines, unfortunately, with his ankle injury. John Conchar is a guy who's just kind of been hanging around. And all of a sudden, the last couple of games, Eric, averaging 3.5 threes, averaging 17.5 points, averaging 9.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists. You buying?
Yeah, definitely. Conchar, as far as I'm concerned, is virtually must roster even in 12 teamers right now. Given the situation, I mean, contextualizing it in, as you said, those two injuries to the Grizzlies backcourt, because also Dillon Brooks is who he is, and he's gonna mess up. I mean, folks, it might not be something that might have stuck in your memory, but I think about 2 seasons ago, for back-to-back seasons, Dillon Brooks led the league in fouls made. So he's not exactly the smartest player in terms of basketball IQ and in terms of making the smartest plays on the floor. So he's, not up there. But what Conchar lacks in terms of athleticism, he's actually pretty smart and he's underrated in terms of his basketball IQ. So in that particular metric, I'd rate Conchar actually higher than Brooks. Though obviously Brooks is the more established, more talented, more self-confident scorer. Conchar, because of his shooting efficiency, yeah, he doesn't, hurt you anywhere. His turnovers are low, and as you said, he's an underrated passer. I think he does just enough in so many categories without giving you any drawbacks that he'll be a benefit to almost any team in a standard league. Love him.
All right. You heard it. I mean, you heard it from Eric. Love him. Must roster in a 12-team league. All right. There we go. All right. Question from OJ. Eric, would you drop Isaiah Jackson for Jalen Williams? 12-team, 9-cat. Just looking for value out of that spot.
All right.
Excuse me.
Okay. No, bless you. All right. Here's an interesting thing. I'm going to share this with you. It's from our internal conversations here at Sports Ethos regarding Isaiah Jackson. Our line right now is Jax is a hold, even though I am a fan of Jalen Williams. But it's really undeniable what Jax was able to do last season when given the opportunity. Unfortunately, right now, Miles Turner is just playing so well, and there's hardly any minutes left on the table for Jackson. The last game, um, I think the news or the report from a beat writer was that um, Jackson played the fewest minutes. I think it was a season low, but that was because Aaron Nesmith went off and had the game of his career.
And the
So
Pacers were
he's
playing small down the stretch there for sure.
exactly. So Jackson, who is probably the most traditional center type player that they have, didn't fit the style of play that they were running towards the end of that game. But that said, um, this guy is gonna pop with something like top 75 floor per game value, assuming he had those center minutes. I know it's a tough hold, um, but I would recommend the hold. But if you're really suffering, okay, if you're really suffering, you're outside of playoff contention right now, and you need to make a big move. Um, I think that Jalen Williams is an okay ad. I like Williams, as I said, as a glue guy. He is, in all honesty, performing at a more consistent, more productive level than Jackson is. Um, and I just hope that if you do end up dropping Jackson, that nobody picks him up so that you'll OJ have an opportunity to grab him if and when you know he starts to deliver.
I mean, these are the kinds of guys who the minute you drop, you feel like you should have kept them, because you should have just kept the house in order, right? They're going to probably fluctuate for a good portion of the season so long as everybody is healthy. But let me tell you why I don't hate it. I don't know that Miles Turner for sure gets traded. It seems likely, but it doesn't seem imminent. Okay. The Pacers are pretty content on playing Jalen Smith as well, who I know everybody couldn't wait to celebrate. Or I shouldn't say everybody. Some people couldn't wait to celebrate after 10 and 18 and 3 blocks. And oh my God, here he is after a stretch of, just some mad games. And then he bounces back with 14 and 5 and no defensive stats. So, I didn't hear a whole lot from that crowd during that time. But nonetheless, after I get off my soapbox here, 30 minutes, 25 minutes, 26 minutes, if he's going to play those minutes, Miles Turner is healthy and the Pacers got all these other guys that can run out there, it's going to be tough for Isaiah Jackson to see the court. That said, I think Jalen Williams is a guy who could actually increase value as the season goes along. Yeah, he's a rookie, and yeah, he's going to have some hard rope to learn along the way, but we know the Thunder love to rest those players. And if you don't think they're playing for a chance at Wemby, you are out of your mind. So as good as SGA has been to start this season, boy, it would be real hard for me if I had SGA in any leagues not to be tempted by a sell high opportunity. Josh Giddey is another guy who could be shut down as the season progresses forward, and you're in that crucial playoff stretch. Boy, you need those performers. So I don't really hate the move, especially if you have a positional need that is not at the big man position. But again, this is really a matter of kind of preference of value and what better fits your team, especially OJ. If you're just looking for value out of that spot, really depends on what your team needs more. And don't chase things like if you are so far back where one player is not going to make the difference in a category, don't chase that category. As Erik said earlier, solidify your strengths. So I would say whatever player puts you in a better position to solidify your strengths, I would go with that player, and hopefully that's helpful for you. Erik, as we sit here and this week has come to a close, and here we got Thanksgiving coming up, and people are going to be around more often, right, with the holiday season starting to come on and maybe a little bit more active on their waiver wires. Is there anyone who you have deemed an early waiver wire gem of the season? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Initially, I was gonna say Charles Bassey, but he's fallen off. Right? He's fallen off completely. I think I'm gonna stick with my gun, stick with my guys. I'm still high on Reeves, as we mentioned. I still really like Corey Kispert of the Wizards. Um, Torrey Craig's probably rostered at this point. Um, this is weird, and I don't know if this applies to any of you guys out there, but in a couple of my 16 team leagues, Cameron Payne was dropped, I guess, preemptively by a couple of managers. So and it happened in two leagues, not just one. And I was able to pick him up in one of those leagues. And I found that weird, uh, because he's playing so well, and we're probably gonna say, yeah, he's playing well because Chris Paul is out. But then I'm thinking, even with Chris Paul back, and looking back at how Chris Paul has been prior to his injury, there might just be enough minutes usage and further Chris Paul injuries down the road that Cameron Payne is a hold. So if for some reason, maybe even in a 12-team league, people are expecting Chris Paul to be back and will drop or have dropped Cameron Payne, I'd say pick him up. I think that Cameron Payne is going to carry over some level of solid floor. Obviously, not at the ridiculous gaudy numbers he's been putting up over the last, 5 games or so. But, even if you get something like 15 points, 5 assists, a steal and a 3 from him at good, field goal percentage and low turnovers, that's already the kind of end of bench production you're going to get out of a, backup point guard in a 12-team league. That's superior to most of the guys on the waiver wire, right? So,
I'd say so.
Yeah. So Cameron Payne is somebody I would not drop, first of all, and I'd pick up, because in the other league, by the way, where he was dropped, somebody blew their waiver wire position just to secure him, right? And that just highlights the point that some people do see the long term value of Cameron Payne. So stick with Payne. Yeah,
I'm gonna give you one just to sort of play the interesting card here, because it's not a guy we've talked a lot about throughout the season so far. How about Malik Beasley? Kind of forgotten about in Utah, right? Kind of just got dumped over there in the Gobert trade. Nobody really thought about it. Wasn't really playing a huge role to start the season. Now all of a sudden, Eric, this is a guy who you're looking back at in November. Since November has started, this guy has only gotten better. Going back to November 7th against the Lakers in a blowout win. 4 threes. Next game, 6 threes. Next game, 4 threes. Next game, 4, 3. The last 2 games, he's hit 13 3-point shots, has scored 56 points on 20 of 37 from the field. The dude is, he doesn't do anything besides score and hit threes. But when you hit 13 over a 2-game stretch and shooting better than 50% from the field, it surprises me that Malik Beasley, who's a guy in 9-cat leagues ranked outside the top 150, is not more talked about, because on the season you're talking about a top 50 player who's barely rostered in more than 50% of Yahoo leagues.
That's surprising, and I sadly didn't bother mentioning him because he's completely rostered in all of my leagues. Okay, he's rostered in all of my leagues.
Of course,
he's been putting on 3/4 of a Steph Curry show every night, and the good 3/4 of Steph Curry, to be exact. I would even venture to say that he's currently the second best player on the Jazz. Only behind Lauri Markkanen, given Markkanen's equally hot start. And I'm pretty sure I'm not wrong there. So, yeah, if for some reason you're in a league where Malik Beasley is on the wire, somehow he should be rostered, okay? I feel dirty having to say that, because there's something wrong. And I mean this, half jokingly and half insultingly. If you're in a league where Malik Beasley is on the wire, leave that league, because it's not a competitive one. You're not going to be challenged, because the guys you're playing against, including yourself for not picking him up earlier, are just not playing the game right. He is playing so well, and it's bad that he's gone this long unnoticed in so many leagues. I'll end it there.
It is. Okay, so in the interest, because we're just about out of time, so in the interest of ending things, on a somewhat interesting note. So as I mentioned, Thanksgiving is coming up this week here, and everybody's going to be around a little bit more. One of my favorite Thanksgiving traditions is, besides getting together with people that I enjoy spending time with and being grateful and practicing gratitude, there's always at least one thing, sort of like an airing of the grievances, a little festivus, if you will, something that is an annoyance that you've been dealing with. Well, the annoyance that I've been dealing with is the Knicks big man position, Eric. And now that you've got Isaiah Hartenstein and Jericho Sims and Mitchell Robinson, I want you to pick one of those guys for the rest of the season. Just one.
Oh gosh. All right. To be transparent, I have shares of Hartenstein. I have one share of Mitch Robinson. So I feel this ugly tug of war. Uh, that's the most frustrating coach, I would say, probably in the NBA right now. Tom Thibodeau is putting us through. Uh I'm gonna have to go with my gut and lean in on what Hartenstein was able to deliver last year with the Clippers and those well-rounded stat lines, those numbers, um, despite disappearing over the last several games, will come back somehow. Um, yeah, but I'm not keeping my hopes that high because I know Tom Thibodeau long enough. I'm that old that I'm this familiar with Tom Thibodeau that he is just gonna frustrate me even more and is probably gonna keep this timeshare. He is notorious for giving guys who don't deserve minutes like Taj Gibson, you know. Um, so
Hey, at least he's got Evan Fournier glued to the bench.
okay, he got one thing on the Knicks right, and that's benching Evan Fournier finally.
By the
Um,
way, the Knicks have they invested $140 million into Mitchell Robinson and Evan Fournier.
hey, before my trip to Thailand, I bought shades that didn't actually fit correctly, so you know.
Sometimes we all make mistakes, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, some more expensive than others. I
Yeah.
guess the Knicks have a bigger wallet than I do and can afford to make pricier mistakes. But there you go.
So be it. So yeah, I mean, as a Mitchell Robinson guy, it has been very frustrating. At the minute I drafted him, it was kind of I always seem to always have at least one what I like to call panic picks in drafts, where you're in between two guys and you finally decide on this guy, and then the minute you draft him, you say, I should have went the other way, and you take that deep breath and you're like, damn. And that's exactly how I felt about the Mitchell Robinson pick. Unfortunately, he has done absolutely nothing to get me off of that stool. So it is just sink or swim with Mitch Rob at this time, and it looks like more of a sink than a swim. So we're gonna sink like a stone instead of floating like a pebble, I suppose. But hey, so be it. Eric, do you do anything special this week for Thanksgiving or anything special for the holiday? Is it observed in any way?
No, no,
That's no.
we don't celebrate that over here. Unfortunately, that's an American exclusive, and maybe up to Canada, I believe. But they have their own schedule for that kind of thing. But in the spirit of that holiday that you do, I'd like to express my thanks for this season and somehow things aligning that I'm able to do this show once again with you, buddy. It's the brightest part of my week, the part of the week that I look most forward to in this job here at Ethos. And I'm thankful that we're back together.
I appreciate that, man. Same energy right back to you, of course. It's awesome to end my week, and I guess for you to start your week on that same wave, right? So I appreciate that from you and everybody who always watches, tunes in, questions, or if you're a silent watcher, that's okay too. I know sometimes it's intimidating to ask a question. We appreciate all you guys. We look forward to seeing you soon. But until next time, we out. See you guys.